Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at something you might not expect. We're diving into the world of physical education and all the different terms, all the different ways people talk about it. Like sometimes you hear people talking about PE, and then other times it's health and physical education, and then you got physical literacy and health literacy too. It can get really confusing.
It really can. And it's not just about the words themselves though, right? The words we use actually reflect our deeper beliefs and values about, how important movement is and well-being in education.
That's what we're going to unpack today. We've got this fascinating research article here that explores why there's so much confusion
Yeah.
around these terms and what that means for, for students and teachers.
It's like a detective story, really. We're going to trace the evolution of these terms
Yeah.
and try to understand why they've become, such a tangled web.
Okay, so let's put on our detective hats then. Let's start with the basics. The article looks at a study done with educators in the United States, and they were asked about their understanding of these terms: physical education, health and physical education, physical literacy, and health literacy, and how those terms are actually used in practice. I'm curious, what were your initial thoughts when you started digging into this research?
Well, the first thing that struck me was the historical context. It's fascinating to see how, the very idea of physical education has evolved, over time, and how those changes in thinking are reflected in the terms we use today. I mean, for a lot of history, physical education was a much broader term than it is today. It included elements of health, and well-being and even spirituality.
So we're talking way back in the day, like ancient Greece.
Exactly. The article talks about the Athenian ideal of educating both the mind and the body, and that concept sounds pretty familiar to our, modern understanding of health and physical education, or HPE.
That makes sense. The ancient Greeks were all about balance,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. They recognized the interconnectedness, of physical well-being and intellectual development. And, the Spartans, who were famous for their warrior culture, they even had state-regulated physical education programs. But what's really interesting is that those programs involve similar experiences for men and women.
Wow, I never knew that about the Spartans. Okay, so we're seeing this idea of connecting physical activity with overall well-being is not new, but somewhere along the line, things started to get a little more complicated. When did health and physical education, or HPE, become a distinct concept?
The article points to the 20th century as a turning point, I think. There was a growing recognition that education needed to address the whole child. So not just their physical development, but their social, emotional, and mental well-being. And this shift towards a more holistic approach to education is really key to understanding the emergence of HPE as a distinct term.
And this trend wasn't just happening in the United States, right? The article mentioned something about the Australian Council for Health, Physical Education and Recreation, or ACHPER.
Yes, ACHPER is a great example of how this holistic view of physical education was gaining traction internationally. They actually changed their name to reflect this broader focus, incorporating, health into their title.
So it sounds like things were starting to move in a more integrated direction. But then enter physical literacy and health literacy. And those are the terms that seem to be causing the most head-scratching these days. I know I'm still trying to wrap my head around them.
I can understand why you'd say that. These terms are often presented as separate concepts, even though they're really deeply intertwined with physical education itself.
I remember there was this one quote in the article from a researcher. It said, "Is physical literacy simply a rose by any other name?"
Yeah, right. And it perfectly captures the confusion. They're often used interchangeably, but they do have distinct meanings, which adds another layer of, complexity to the whole conversation.
So where do we go from here? We've got this historical backdrop. We've got HPE gaining momentum, and then we have these new terms like physical literacy and health literacy kind of popping up and muddying the waters. How do we even begin to untangle this mess?
Well, that's where our detective work gets interesting. To really understand this, complex situation, we need to dive deeper into how those newer terms are being used and understood, particularly in the context of education. We also need to examine, I think, the motivations behind introducing these terms and, whether they truly add value to the conversation or just create more confusion.
It's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion here.
Exactly.
So for our listeners, get ready to dive into the nitty-gritty of these terms because things are about to get really fascinating.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about how physical literacy and health literacy have kind of entered the conversation around physical education, and it seems like they've added more confusion than clarity, really.
Yeah, you're right. It's like we were just starting to understand health and physical education or HPE, and then these new terms popped up, making everything a bit, well, murky. So where do we even begin to untangle this?
Well, I think a good place to start is by, taking a closer look at physical literacy. It's a term that's gaining a lot of traction these days. But it seems like everyone has like a slightly different understanding of what it actually means.
I feel like I've seen a million definitions. Some focus on movement skills and then others on like confidence and motivation, and then others on knowledge and understanding. It can be overwhelming to keep track of it all. What's your take on all this?
What's fascinating is that physical literacy isn't really a new concept. The article points out that it's been around for decades, even appearing in educational writings in the early 1900s. But as we've seen with physical education itself, the meaning of terms can shift over time, often reflecting, like evolving societal values and priorities.
So in a way, physical literacy is kind of like a repackaging of older ideas.
That's a great way to put it. And the article, it delves into why this repackaging might be happening. You see, physical literacy has a certain, ring to it, a certain appeal that maybe physical education lacks in today's world.
I can see that. It sounds modern, almost like trendy.
Exactly. And it might be easier to get buy-in, from policymakers and educators who are like looking for innovative approaches to address declining physical activity levels, especially among young people. The term physical literacy might sound more appealing in, let's say, grant proposals or policy documents. It may even attract more funding, right? But the question is, does this repackaging actually lead to meaningful changes in practice? Or is it just like a superficial rebranding?
That's a really good question. It makes you wonder if we're so focused on coming up with like new labels that we're losing sight of the core principles of what makes for effective physical education, regardless of what we call it.
That's a concern that the article raises as well. It highlights the worries of some researchers who believe that this emphasis on physical literacy could actually be counterproductive.
Counterproductive. How so?
Well, for one thing, it can create confusion, as we've already discussed. Teachers are already grappling with limited time and resources, and often a lack of support, really, for physical education. Adding like a new term with a vaguely defined meaning just adds another layer of complexity to their, already challenging roles.
That makes sense. It's like we're asking them to, learn a whole new language when they're already struggling to communicate effectively with the language they have.
Precisely. And there's another potential downside to this focus on physical literacy. Some researchers, they worry that it could lead to a situation where physical literacy is seen as something, separate from or even in competition with physical education.
So instead of strengthening existing physical education programs, we're creating a whole new silo that might actually divert like resources and attention away from where they're most needed.
That's the risk, and it's one that we need to be, mindful of as we navigate this evolving landscape.
It seems like we're constantly searching for the magic bullet, the perfect term that will suddenly solve all of our problems related to physical inactivity. But maybe the answer lies in getting back to basics, in clarifying what we mean by physical education and ensuring that it's, given the attention and support it deserves.
I completely agree. The article actually points out that many of the core elements of physical literacy are actually like borrowed from existing concepts within physical education. For example, it mentions researcher Robert Pangrazzi, who outlined 8 essential components of a quality physical education program, like back in 2001. These include things like being guided by content standards, being student-centered and developmentally appropriate, emphasizing, learning and skill development rather than just outcomes, and promoting inclusion for all students.
Those are all fantastic principles, and they sound very similar to the characteristics often associated with, physical literacy, right? The emphasis on like lifelong engagement in physical activity, developing a wide range of movement skills and fostering positive attitudes and beliefs about physical activity. All of these concepts have been advocated by physical education proponents for years.
Exactly. So it begs the question, why introduce a new term like physical literacy if it's essentially describing the same goals and outcomes as a quality physical education program? Maybe it's partly a reaction to the perceived failures of, let's say, traditional physical education.
What do you mean by failures?
Well, let's be honest. In many cases, physical education hasn't lived up to its, full potential. It's often been relegated to a like marginalized position in the curriculum with limited time and resources. And in some instances, it's become more about like rote learning of sports skills and less about fostering a genuine love of movement and physical activity.
I think back to my own experiences in PE, and I have to admit, they weren't always the most, positive and inspiring. We mostly just played dodgeball, and I was never very good at it.
Yeah.
I can definitely see how those kinds of experiences could lead some people to, search for a new approach, a new way of framing what physical activity can be.
That's a great point. And it highlights the importance of reflecting on our own experiences and understanding how they shape our perceptions of physical activity. The article suggests that physical literacy may be seen as a way to like rebrand physical education, to give it a fresh start and to try to address some of those past shortcomings. But simply changing the label won't solve the underlying problems, right?
So it's not just about semantics, it's about addressing these systemic issues that have prevented physical education from truly thriving.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the other term that's causing a stir, health literacy. This term has a slightly different focus, but it's just as interconnected with physical education as physical literacy.
Okay, let's unpack health literacy a bit. How does it fit into this whole conversation?
The article defines health literacy as the ability to selectively access and critically analyze information, navigate community services and resources, and take action to promote personal health and the health of others.
So it's about empowering individuals to make informed decisions about their health and well-being, but with a particular emphasis on being able to access and understand, health information.
Exactly. The concept of health literacy originally emerged from concerns about low literacy skills in general, and then a negative impact this can have on like health outcomes. Research shows that individuals with low health literacy often face greater challenges in, things like managing chronic conditions or accessing healthcare services, and even understanding basic health information.
It makes sense that if you struggle to read or understand and act on, health information, it's going to be harder to navigate the complex world of healthcare and make informed decisions about your own health. But how does this connect back to physical education?
Well, think about it. Physical education is the perfect setting to like introduce students to basic health concepts and to help them develop the skills and knowledge they need to make healthy choices. It's about so much more than just teaching kids how to, play sports or how to run a mile.
It's about giving them the tools they need to be active and healthy throughout their lives.
Precisely. And that includes equipping them with, the critical thinking skills to evaluate health information, to advocate for their own health needs, and to like make informed decisions about their own well-being. So health literacy really goes, hand in hand with physical literacy and with the overall goals of a quality physical education program.
So we're seeing a pattern here, whether we're talking about physical education, health and physical education,
Mhm.
physical literacy, or health literacy. The underlying goal is to create a world where individuals are empowered to move confidently and to make healthy choices throughout their lives.
You've hit the nail on the head, and it's a powerful message. But as the article we're discussing so eloquently points out, the way we use language can either, support or hinder that goal.
Okay, so let's get practical here. What are some concrete steps we can take to address this nomenclature confusion and create a more, I guess, unified and effective approach to physical education and health education? What advice does the research offer? This is where I need your expert insights.
The authors of this research make a compelling argument for a return to simplicity and clarity in our language. They suggest that instead of trying to introduce, new terms that further complicate the landscape, we should focus on strengthening and clarifying the meaning of the terms we already have.
So back to basics.
In a way, yes, they advocate for a renewed emphasis on the term physical education, but with a clear understanding that it encompasses both physical and health components. It's about, reclaiming that term and redefining it as a holistic subject that equips individuals with the knowledge, skills, and motivation to lead, physically active and healthy lives.
Okay, I could see the appeal of simplifying things, but wouldn't that just put us back where we started with all that confusion about whether PE is just about, sports and fitness?
That's why clarity is so important. And it's not just about the words themselves, but about the actions we take to like support those words.
Yeah.
If we're going to use physical education as the umbrella term, we need to ensure that it's reflected in practice.
Yeah.
That it's not just about dodgeball and running laps, but about fostering a lifelong, love of movement and equipping individuals with the knowledge and skills to make healthy choices.
So we need to be clear about what we mean by physical education and then put our money where our mouth is by providing the necessary resources and support for teachers to, implement quality programs. But how do we get everyone on the same page?
That's where, professional organizations and educational institutions have a crucial role to play, I think. They need to work together to develop clear and consistent messaging about, what physical education means and what it should look like in practice. This effort needs to involve, teachers, administrators, policymakers, researchers, and even like parents and community members. It's about creating a shared vision for physical education that everyone can understand and support.
It sounds like a tall order, but a worthy one. Are there any other recommendations?
Well, in addition to clarifying the meaning of physical education, they also stress the importance of, addressing the practical challenges that prevent teachers from delivering quality programs. We've already talked about the issue of time constraints, right? The article emphasizes the need to allocate, sufficient time for physical education, both in terms of like class periods and in terms of the overall school day.
I think that's a point that needs to be driven home again and again. We
Mhm.
can't expect teachers to work miracles if they're only given a tiny sliver of time to teach a subject that's, so crucial to students' well-being.
I couldn't agree more. It's about making physical education a priority, not just in words, but in actions. And it's not just about time. The article also highlights the need for professional development and ongoing support for teachers. Physical education is a complex and evolving field, and teachers need to be equipped with, the latest research, strategies, and resources to effectively meet the needs of their students. It's about investing in our educators so that they can, in turn, invest in our children.
That makes sense. We wouldn't expect a math teacher to teach calculus without proper training and resources. So why would we expect any different for physical education teachers?
Exactly. And that investment needs to include, not just professional development, but also adequate funding for equipment, facilities, and curriculum materials. If we want physical education to be a vibrant and effective part of the educational landscape, we need to put our money where our mouth is.
Well said. The article also touched on the importance of involving parents and the wider community in supporting physical education, right?
Yes. Creating a culture that values physical activity and healthy living requires a whole community approach. Schools can play a key role in fostering this culture, but they can't do it alone.
Hmm.
Parents, community organizations, and even like local businesses can all contribute to creating environments that encourage and support physical activity. Imagine a world where children see physical activity modeled and valued in all aspects of their lives, not just within the confines of a PE class.
That's a beautiful vision. And it speaks to the transformative power of, shifting our collective mindset about physical activity and well-being. But I'm left wondering what all of this means for the average person, the listener who's tuning into the deep dive. Why should they care about this debate over terminology?
That's a fantastic question, and it's one we'll delve into when we return for the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring this, sometimes confusing world of terms used in physical education, and I think we can all agree that whether we call it PE or HPE, physical literacy, health literacy, like we want people to be active and healthy, right?
Yeah.
But why does all this terminology debate matter to like the everyday person?
That's the question we left you with, right? And it's a really important one because, at its heart, this isn't just some academic debate about semantics, This is about something much bigger. It's about our collective understanding of the importance of movement and physical activity in our lives
Mhm.
and ensuring that everyone, regardless of age or ability or background, has the opportunity to develop those skills, the knowledge and the confidence to lead a healthy and active life.
So you're saying the language we use like shapes our perceptions, our policies, and even our actions.
Exactly. If we're using vague or confusing language, if we're sending like mixed messages about what physical education is and why it matters, then we're doing a disservice to everyone, really.
It's like we're undermining the very foundation of a healthy society.
Precisely. And that's why it's so crucial for us to be mindful of the language we use, to advocate for clear and consistent terminology, and to support efforts to strengthen strengthen and elevate the field of physical education as a whole.
Okay, so what can our listeners do? How can they make a difference in this conversation?
Well, they can start by, becoming more aware of the language being used in their own communities. Pay
Yeah.
attention to, like, how schools, community organizations, and even like the media talk about physical activity and health.
Mm.
Are they using clear, consistent language? Are they promoting like a holistic vision of physical education that encompasses both the physical and the mental aspects of well-being?
So the first step is to like listen and observe.
Yes. And then, don't be afraid to ask questions. If you hear someone using a term you don't understand, ask for clarification. If you see an opportunity to advocate for a more inclusive or comprehensive approach to physical activity, speak up. Remember, you don't need to be an expert to have a voice in this conversation.
So it's about becoming informed advocates for change.
Exactly. And that advocacy can take many forms. You can talk to, your children's teachers about the physical education programs in their schools. You can get involved in like local initiatives to promote physical activity in your community. You can, support organizations that are working to advance the field of physical education.
So many options. It sounds like there's a role for everyone in this movement.
There really is. And I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about like improving the lives of children or athletes this is about creating a healthier, happier, and more vibrant society for everyone.
That's a powerful message to end on. It's a reminder that the language we use matters and that we all have a role to play in shaping the future of, physical activity and health.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something new and feel inspired to, think a little bit more deeply about the power of words and the importance of movement in our lives.
And remember, keep those questions coming. Until next time, happy moving.
Right.